But I want to maybe talk a little bit about the recent event, the Sunday event, just for 30 seconds, and I'm happy to talk about it more during the Q&A session. But I just want to say that we were as ready as we can be. The system was at its fullest in terms of the capacity, power capacity, and in terms of pumping capacity. We run about 115 pumps on daily basis, ready to function and operate out of the about 120. And that's a very normal state of our capacity on any given day. But what happened Sunday is that you had about an 8-inch storm in places where it just overwhelmed the system. And I can assure you, having experienced flooding in Milwaukee, where we've had 700-year storms, any system will be overwhelmed at one point. And that's just a fact of life. And as we move forward, and we can talk about this in a second, there are things that we can do to improve and better the system and increase capacity, but we can never be assured that there is no storm that we cannot manage. There will always be an event that will overwhelm the city, and that's just a fact of life. 3 of the 5 turbines are steam reliant. They use steam, very old, as you can see, over 100 years in some instance. And while we've been investing in repairing them for years, and it became very evident to me that the time has come, that we can no longer continue to invest in these machines. It's been remarkable what our men and women have done with these machines to make them operate and keep the city dry. But these are very cost ineffective. We spend 4 times as much money on generating our own power versus buying it. And we spend a lot of money on parts and maintenance. It is just not a sustainable situation, and that became extremely evident that we need to move forward away from using steam and into other alternative energy, either purchased or renewable energy as we move forward. And if you have take about a 100-year replacement cycle, and you divide that up by 20-year increments, you will have maybe 300 plus or minus miles in each of the 20-year increment or segment. And then the top one would have 0 in it. While in fact we have over 500 miles of the 1500 that is older than 100 years old. That's an astonishing figure. And if you look on the bottom where you would expect to see 300 miles, you have almost none. So this explains why we have this. So many of you probably were inconvenienced or maybe even suffered because of this specific water main break on Claiborne on May 3rd. I have never seen this. I've been in this business for 30 years plus. I've never seen a water main break with this gaping hole. This main, I have to assure you, that has been leaking for years. For years. This didn't just happen overnight. It takes 1 second, and it just slight change in pressure or shift in the soil, and then it just pops. And that's what you see. And that's why we have such a struggle throughout the city with leaky mains. When you lose more than half of what you make, I mean, we're making twice as much water as we need to because our water system continues to leak. And if you compare it to the national average, we are 3 or 4 times as high in terms of how much water we lose. And if you look at how many repairs you experience in this city versus the national standard, is about 5 times as high. And finally, I want to just talk about, in general, the customer service or customer advocacy. One thing we want to focus on as we reorganized our utility, and the org chart, it looks like this. This is the proposed. We elevated 2 key things. One is the customer service advocacy office. to work on behalf of the customer on many facets, on many aspects, not only just billing, but we interface with our customers on a daily basis in more ways than one, and we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to provide the best service we possibly can. And we can only do that if you have somebody who advocates on behalf of the customers and change the culture from within, so we are more sensitive and more caring toward the people that we serve.
The legislature appears poised to direct new revenue to the city infrastructure. How will the new revenue affect the administration's plans for pursuing a drainage fee?
I think the stormwater management fee is an inevitable conversation. As I showed you, some of those funding is filling some of the gap. But if you really look at the big picture and you start understanding the level of service that this city deserves, the conversation will be had, and without a stormwater management fee, we cannot move forward in any significant or meaningful way.
A member of the audience asked, do you plan on adding additional pumps? And I might add to that, based on what happened Sunday, is there a way to improve the system so that kind of rain doesn't lead to flooding? I know that there's some things that just are going to overwhelm the system, but that kind of rain, is there a way to improve it so we can get through it without flooding?
Well, we certainly can improve the level of service. I mean, currently the system is designed to address 1 inch an hour, first 1 inch an hour, and then ½ inch for every hour after that. We could double that. I mean, but it takes an enormous amount of dollars and footprint to create that system. But again, you cannot underscore or talk about improving the system just with the gray infrastructure alone. It has to have a green infrastructure solution as part of that.
You've talked about the need to consolidate the management of the drainage system under one utility. Can you elaborate on your vision for that, and to what extent does it depend on new funding?
Well, it's pretty simple. I mean, you have one drainage system that belongs to 2 entities, and it can work if everybody does their part and everything, but ultimately it would be more ideal and more effective if one entity owns this. And I can tell you, not only I'm advocating for that, DPW is advocating for that. I think the city would be, even the mayor would be very supportive of that. What needs to happen is that the appropriate and adequate funding associated with that responsibility has to be created first, so we can improve on it. And because just one ownership alone is not going to just solve it. Obviously, funding and a more systematic approach to it, but by one entity is the key.
Any sense of how much more funding?
How much more money? We have not really quantified that yet, because again, you have to understand where the level of service is before you quantify the costs associated with it.
A member of the audience asks, if we do manage to reduce our leakage rate by even 10% or 20%, what's forecast for the city's water table and resultant subsidence?
That's kind of an interesting dynamic. So part of our sanitary sewer system actually take on some of the groundwater or rainwater, and we know that because after a rain event, the volumes of water we treat at our sewer treatment plant just spike like crazy. And I know for a fact that our leaky water mains are kind of, not by design, but they're replenishing that groundwater indirectly. A horrible system. That's not something we do by design, but that's exactly what's happening now. I mean, I almost think that that's a silly question in a way, because we should not be relying on distribution of drinking water to replenish the groundwater, but it's happening. And to quantify and the impact of if you lessen it or increase it is very difficult to do, but we know it's part of that dynamic that's happening underground.